Okay. We'll call a meeting to order. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to the thousands that are at home watching this broadcast. On behalf of, it's available to millions, but we're disappointed that it's only thousands. On behalf of Council, we'd like to welcome you all here today. Twice a year, Council holds town hall meetings to provide residents with an opportunity to share their ideas and comments on issues affecting the city. We consider the information we receive from you very important in helping us shape our future priorities. So thank you to everyone who's here to speak with us today, and thank you to everyone participating online via our webcast and social media channels. I'll start by introducing my colleagues up here on Council. We've got Councillor Brent Asmundson, Councillor Terry Towner, Councillor Dennis Marsden, and Councillor Chris Wilson. And on this side, Councillor May Reid, Councillor Benita Zarillo, and Councillor Craig Hodge. And I do express regrets for Councillor Terry O'Neill. There's been a death in the family, and he is attending a funeral this morning. We send, of course, our condolences and our well wishes to the family. We also have a number of key staff members in attendance, including our City Manager, Peter Steblin, our Deputy City Manager, John Dumont, Julie Droter, the Administration and Community Programs Officer for the RCMP, Wade Peerlett, our Fire Chief, Raul Alhueva, our General Manager of Parks, Recreation and Culture, Joseph Diozegi, our General Manager of Engineering and Public Works, Jim McIntyre, our General Manager of Planning and Development, Harry Stanisha, our General Manager of Strategic Initiatives, Nikki Caulfield, our Director of Corporate and Personnel Planning. Oops, not here yet. Graham Stewart, our Manager of Corporate Planning. Gary Jackson, our soon-to-be retired. He's looking forward to his last town hall meeting as Revenue Services Manager representing the Finance Department. Today's town hall meeting also has an online component, as we are also accepting questions submitted digitally. Periodically throughout the meeting, we will take short breaks from the in-person questions to respond to residents that have submitted questions via the online formats of email, Twitter, and Facebook. If you are monitoring today's meeting on Twitter, please note that the hashtag for today's meeting is hashtag COQTHM, that would be Coquitlam Town Hall Meeting, COQTHM 2016. That's all 10 characters after the hashtag. In a moment, the floor will be open to anyone that wishes to ask questions or present his or her views on issues affecting the city. We'll ask each speaker to state their name and address for the record, and then we'll be producing minutes of the meeting distributed to all of Council and made available to the public via a future Council agenda. Additionally, a few days after the meeting, the archive of the webcast will be available online. It's broadcast live now and will be archived to the website probably on Monday or Tuesday. Council members are here with an open mind and are here to listen to your input. When making your presentation to Council, we'll ask that you be as brief and concise as possible. We ask speakers to respect a 5-minute time limit in order to ensure that everyone who wishes to speak is able to do so. After everyone has spoken once, we'll open the floor again to anyone that wants to speak a second time or a third time. As long as you still got some good stuff, please feel free to step up to the microphone. Where appropriate, Council may ask staff to respond to presenters regarding their specific inquiry, whether that be immediately, after the meeting has concluded, or in the days to come. I'll ask that the audience be respectful of each speaker and allow that speaker to make his or her point without interruption, even if you don't agree with the speaker. Please, we find it much more amenable to public dialogue if everyone is respected when they're at the microphone, because it can make people nervous. So we'll ask you all as well to refrain from clapping and booing and cheering and jeering of any presentation by a resident or during any response from Council or staff. As chair of the meeting, I reserve the right to conclude any presentation that becomes abusive or becomes repetitive of views that speaker has already made known to Council members. I will now open the floor and ask that anyone wishing to address Council proceed to the microphone at the front of the room. The microphone at the front of the room is actually on the sloping podium. Doesn't look like a microphone, but it is a microphone. Seeing none, we'll call the meeting over. Please, step forward, sir. Yeah, it's the sloping podium. The podium, right there.
Oh, all right. Oh, yeah, I see that. All right. Yeah, thank you.
Doesn't look much like a microphone, does it?
Thank you for allowing me to speak out. My name is Rudy Tietze. I live in 1555 Lodgepole Place, Coquitlam. And I've been to a town hall meeting before, and my question, first of all, is our concerns, will they be addressed, or is it just a matter of listen to us and then garbage? Because several times people have addressed council and nothing gets done. One of my pet peeves is when I drive Lougheed, there's no way that I can make the next light. Why do not have sequential lights so that you have like a green wave? And the worst pollution on the city or from cars is idling cars. Yet all over the world, people or the countries are doing this, yet looks like we are so far behind that we think we're number one. This should be addressed. I mean, Coquitlam is a green city, supposedly, and yet that doesn't get addressed. We're driving sometimes, the light goes red, there's no vehicles on either side, it just goes red. That's, to me, it's a waste of gas, a lot of pollution. And this has been brought up several times before, but obviously nothing gets done.
Okay, well, I thank you for that. I'm going to throw the question over to our manager of engineering. We actually do spend an awful lot of time on the expertise associated with traffic signals. And we have traffic signal technologists on staff, and I'm going to throw over to Joseph. Mr. Diozegui.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Right.
We have over 130 traffic signals in the city of Coquitlam, and most of them are connected to our traffic control center via fiber optics. We have staff available, obviously, during the day to monitor the traffic signal operations. Some of them have camera feedback to the control center, so we would know what's happening at that particular location. After hours, we also have the capability remotely observing what's happening, and if needed for some, but not all, of the signals, we can actually modify the timing, manually override the program. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, it doesn't always work, and it cannot always work because of the spacing of the signals, because of the priorities given to certain directions, certain phases at certain times of the day. And so there is just practically no 100% possible way to provide always the green wave to all vehicles. In some instances, if the signals are off the not necessarily off the grid, but there are some instances when the traffic sensors are damaged, as they happen relatively frequently. In that case, we have no choice but to put the signal on a pre-programmed operation, which is out of sync with the other signals and create more problems. So if you could tell me or give me specific locations for those signalized intersections, we'll be more than happy to look at it and get back to you with more specific how they're supposed to work. And at the same time, we would be also looking at if something is not working properly. We don't always know that.
I just, sorry to just mention one of my, I used to drive to work every morning, and there's no way that I could make the next light, like no way. It didn't matter what I tried, other than, speeding, which I didn't really want to do. Lougheed West. And that's, I've been in Fort McMurray. I used to live in Fort McMurray. In Coquitlam for 7 years. and it's still the same thing. I mean, nothing has changed. It's impossible to get the next light. And idling cars, trucks, vehicles, cause a lot of pollution. I mean, we're paying carbon taxes because we want to keep the environment clean, yet we're not doing anything about it. You know, how much cleaner is the environment being since we paid carbon taxes? Can anybody tell me that? It's just a tax grab. And I don't mind paying it as long as I see improvement, but I don't see any improvement.
Well, unfortunately, I fully understand your issue here. Traffic has grown and will keep growing, and the road capacity is pretty well a given. So certain times of the day, like I said, it's impossible to achieve a green wave because we are not dealing with only one direction, we are dealing with two directions and conflicting traffic from the crossroads, and we have to accommodate all of those. So particularly for busy roadways like Lougheed Highway, it's virtually impossible for certain periods of the time to achieve green wave.
So, pardon my ignorance, what time of the day would it be that you could get the next traffic light? Because I tried early in the morning, I tried during the day, I tried the evenings. It doesn't work. And New York is doing it, and it's working out. And New York has a few more cars than Coquitlam.
New York does it primarily on one-way roads because
Pardon?
New York does it primarily on one-way streets.
New York City?
Because if you have two ways, obviously if you turn these two green lights, this one's sequenced this way, that means this one isn't sequenced that way, and they'll conflict unless the roads are exactly the right distance apart. The traffic signals are exactly the right different distance apart. We also had the green wave down major arterials, Como Lake and Austin, when I was younger. And we ended up having to cancel it. It was actually before Joseph joined the city because of the number of serious accidents that we got from people kind of got mesmerized into going 50 kilometers an hour and not having to stop, and suddenly there was a left turn in front of them, and serious accident after serious accident. We've now expanded those intersections to include, a lot of those intersections to include a left turn so that we can reestablish a green wave, but again, you can only do it in one direction and then in the other direction on the way back. And most of our streets are very full in both directions during rush hour, so it's not possible to get a green wave in both directions, even when the road alignment is adjusted as we've been trying to adjust it over the last few years.
I think we are limiting ourselves. I was in Germany about over 40 years ago, and there were signs that would allow you to drive faster. It would give you a speed indication so you could actually make the next light. I mean, it's all computer. It's not nuclear science. It should be able to be done. Anyway, that is my opinion.
No, I appreciate it. We actually do spend a lot of time on the issue.
And, you know, like I said, it's supposed to be a green community, and that idling traffic is probably the worst because of the pollution. We pay carbon taxes because we're supposed to minimize it.
Yep.
Nothing gets done. So to me, it's just a tax grab. But anyway, that's my opinion. Thank you for listening to me.
Not a tax grab by us, though. We don't get any of that money. But thank you. Okay, next speaker, please. Anybody? There you go.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. My name is Danny Peaker. I've lived at 649 Chapman Avenue for over 30 years. I'm the president of the Coquitlam Community Association, and I'm here to find out what I can for us and the several thousand new residents who will be moving into the high-rises, townhouses, and condos being built in our area. I'm referring to Coquitlam Plaza, that tired old rinky-dink, pathetic excuse for a shopping area. It should be the jewel in the crown of this beautiful new transit station and all the new homes clustered around it. Instead, it's a sad reminder of bygone days and needs to be replaced. Not long ago, I saw an artist's rendering of what the new Coquitlam Plaza would look like. I can't remember if it was a city planning document or one from one of the developers. It looked wonderful, upscale and modern. Can you tell us if this plan is actually going to come to pass? Has someone taken on Morguard, the owners of the Coquitlam Plaza, and strong-armed them to the floor? If not, can the Coquitlam Community Association lend a hand?
Feel free to. One thing, you didn't see the plan that will come to fruition. You saw a plan that might come to fruition. It's a conceptual, and we as council can't force a property owner to redevelop. We can try to induce, and we know that property will be redeveloped, but I suspect that they're taking their time with their planning as well. They're entitled to. It's actually a REIT that owns that, which means that there's a whole bunch of other investment entities. It's not Morguard as a company that owns it, but all of their investors, and so it's more challenging for them to undergo renovations or replacement of an existing building. I don't know if Jim, sorry, Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship, and good morning. Good morning, Danny. Great question. Yeah, to this point, not much has happened on the Morguard site. As you're well aware, we're underway with the Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood plan process, and through that, planning staff do talk with Morguard. We try to bring them along. To this point, I think they've been more inwardly looking and dealing with the station and that. Every now and then you hear rumors about other developers interested in acquiring the property, but nothing is really solidified there. The good news, though, and I think maybe the graphic you're referring to might have been from the earlier in the Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood plan process, there was some graphic illustrations, as the mayor said, an idea of what might take place there. And some of that you can see now, like, for example, I'm amazed every time I go up there and see the Safeway Boza project coming out of the ground. That's really progressing well. We've had a number of applications, sort of, if you will, ringing the Coquitlam Plaza site of late. A little further down on Clark, we got another significant one across on the west side of Clark. It's very close to coming to council as well. And as well, the city's got a very exciting project there, and my colleague Raul Alueva may want to talk about that. Right behind the Coquitlam Plaza. So we're almost surrounding them with dynamic projects taking place. So I think something will happen in time.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Reid, want to activate?
Thank you. One of the things I will mention to you in my industry, of course, it's really hard to displace businesses, and Coquitlam Plaza has been there for so many years, and some of the businesses have been displaced. But in the commercial real estate market, people want to stay in the neighborhoods that they can. And so part of it, I think, as Mr. McIntyre and I have had this conversation as the years go on, you can only do so much construction on one site at a time. And I think when you see Safeway coming to completion, then you'll see the rest redevelop. Hopefully there'll be places they can move them back and forth, because it's really, really hard to move a business. That's their whole life. And most of them there want to stay in Coquitlam Plaza. And of course, when the towers come in, which we know there'll be towers, there'll be lots of commercial space on the bottom too. I think you're gonna really like it when it's done. It's just growing pains.
It's just a matter of when.
The matter of when and how we don't displace people's lives and businesses.
Right. There are a lot of empty stores already. I think people are bailing just because they know something's coming and they don't know what it is. And the stores that I frequent, when I ask them, do you know what's happening? None of them have a clue. Morguard's told them nothing. So, it must be hard for them to sort of have this.
Yeah, but some of them go when their leases are ended too.
Yes.
So there's a whole financial package in this as well. So I know my favorite fish and chip shop went. Yes, it was really good. Yeah. Hopefully they'll all be back.
Right. Thank you.
That shopping mall was somewhat tired when I was a boy. Oh, stop it. We'll take one more speaker before we go to the online folks. Anybody? Anybody? No? Okay, well, why don't we go online?
was questions from and comments from Wendy Sandbrook. It's some of my suggestions for a beautiful city of Coquitlam. It says, litter is a huge bug of mine. The garbage cans are few and far between, and the ones at bus stops are so tiny. Have you seen the size of Slurpee cups? And there are no containers for those, obviously, or at butts. If you think people are not going to smoke because there are no butt disposals, dream on. I have, however, seen, certainly in Strip Mall where I live, Lansdowne at Guildford, a slight improvement, and believe that the store managers should have some responsibility to clean up their area of litter. Not so much a question as a comment, but...
And actually, I believe it was written by a pseudonym for Councillor Towner.
Secondly, I was recently walking in the woods behind Scott Creek School, and there were hundreds of beer cans and garbage. I think the school should organize a day for students to pick up litter. The woods should be a safe place for everyone. So, commenting primarily on litter in the city.
You've hit two of these are concerns that council shares, and I don't know if we have a staff person that. Mr. Diozegi, he's kind of responsible for this issue. Well, he is now.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before I would answer straightforward to the first comment, let me share some information. In our city, we have 539 bus stops. Of those 539, 175 has some sort of a bin. 135 of those are bus stop plastic bins strapped to the pole, and we have another 20 or so bus stops where the litter bin is on the ground within 20 meters of the bus stop. Let me share some very alarming fact with all of you. Just for bus stops in the city, we spend every year over $20,000 in litter removal and repairing the cans. For all practical purposes, much of this money is unfortunately and shouldn't be necessary, but this is how it is. Depending on where the bus stop is, we have a service level established. Some of them are emptied once a week, some of them twice, and the balance 3 times a week, and we monitor and make adjustments to the schedule as necessary. As to the cigarette butts, some of the bus stop litter bins have an attachment or we would ask those who still smoke to carefully put out the butts and then place them into the garbage bin as opposed to spread them all around. We try to have some education effort, not necessarily for smokers, but particularly those vendors, typically fast food establishments and similar, that are nearby the bus stops, and try to ask them to remind their customers to dispose of the wrappers and cans and everything else, either at the store they purchased it or properly in litter bins. It's an ongoing issue, and it's very, very difficult to prevent it. But again, it's a very unfortunate expenditure that we really shouldn't spend it all. As to the Scott Creek School, I'll be happy to have our environmental division to contact the school and talk to them about some sort of an effort, maybe a blitzkrieg or similar, where we would participate to a point, as well as we would assist them in explaining how to do it right without causing further damages to the environment.
And I'll also mention one item that Mr. Diozegi didn't, and that is we do have an Adopt a Street and Adopt a Trail, 2 programs, Adopt a Street through our engineering department and Adopt a Trail through our parks department, that allows local residents, and all of council has our own little streets here, and individual families, and I know there our council members whose families have done this as well, that adopt a street near them and keep it clean. I'm not saying that's the absolute solution, but certainly it's something that, because so many residents do take pride in this community, and they share that first bullet, that concern with Wendy. So we'd encourage folks that want to play a part, if they've got a particular route that they walk every morning, there's a formal way to do it or simply an informal way, and that's to carry the dog bag or something and do your part. Thank you very much. And I've got Councillor Towner, sorry.
Thank you. I want to thank this resident for writing in. I promise it wasn't me, as Mayor Stewart alluded to, but I think the mayor and maybe other people know how this is a pet peeve of mine as well. I've been very active in the city picking up litter for a long time, and I've organized a bunch of litter initiative cleanups at different parks and with the school kids, and adopted my street. And because it's Coquitlam's 125th birthday, my goal is to pick up 125 garbage bags with groups of kids and advocates who hate litter as well throughout the year. So if anybody wants to get involved in that, let me know. But I actually have a pending conversation with staff, because recently cleaning up, we're not supposed to have any smoking in our parks, but there are certain areas in our city where I'm finding a lot of cigarette butts in bark mulch around garden areas with benches. And if we head into another really, really hot season, I'm quite concerned that it's a fire hazard. I don't know how flammable bark mulch is, but when it's 30 degrees for days or weeks on end, and I counted 450 cigarette butts one night in this one garden. Anyway, that's a slightly different topic, but this is a concern of mine as well, and I don't want to promote smoking in our green spaces because we don't allow it, but it is an issue that it takes away the enjoyment of others using the green space, and it could potentially be an environmental hazard and a fire hazard. So I appreciate anybody's attention to this issue, and contact me if you want to help out. Thanks.
Oh. Councillor Zerillo.
Interesting. I'm just Googling now if there's any municipalities that are doing something about this cigarette butts, and I'm just wondering if there is any history of any municipality that's working on solutions of the cigarette butts. And also about, I know this would be a user pay type of thing, but is there an opportunity for us as a municipality to reach out to these tobacco companies for some sort of subsidy, or even to invite them to be part of Adopt a Street, to have some of that cleanup subsidized? So 2 questions there. Is there any municipalities doing anything? And 2, can we reach out to the producers, kind of like MMBC?
Go to City Manager Pete Steblin.
On the first one, I have been made aware of an initiative that the mayor of the North Van City has been proposing, and I believe he's going to be taking it forward to the UBCM and other like bodies, and that involves a deposit for cigarettes. And I'm not sure how much success he's had to date, but I have seen a video that he has produced suggesting that might be a way of reducing the litter of cigarette butts, and the deposit system would work similarly to bottles and that kind of stuff. You would return your butts to some entity and collect some money back. So he's just starting that initiative, and you might stay tuned for that at organizations like the UBCM, where I'm sure he's going to be pushing it forward. I would just refer to the other question to Mr. Diozegi.
Mr. Diozegi.
I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Just about almost like a user fee where we would reach out to the tobacco manufacturers to maybe subsidize or adopt a street for us.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that. We have considered this before. I don't think there's anything to prevent us from doing so. I'm not sure how efficient that move may be, but we can certainly try. I think public education might be another way to go, and I believe that we in the city have bylaws that would prohibit littering, and so enforcement could also be a tool. But no, I'll be pleased approaching manufacturers.
That would be awesome, because I know, it's been years they haven't been able to advertise. They do have a lot of disposable income because they can't spend it on advertising. So maybe this would be something they'd like to do for Give Back. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm also contemplating, we just added to some of our garbage cans a rack for the unofficial recyclers for people to put their drink containers that are recyclable, particularly returnable and refundable, in, and folks will come by and pick those out rather than having to go through the garbage. Is there, have we ever contemplated, and I recognize that it's hard to contemplate that in a park since you're not allowed to smoke in a park, but we all know that that's where we find the cigarette butts in many cases. Contemplate some kind of an attachment for some of our garbage cans to at least allow people to butt out on their way into the park. Mr. Alweva.
Thank you, Your Worship. The work that we recently did on our park waste management, we did look at recycling components. We looked at dog waste. We also looked at the efficiency of maintaining, a very, very large system of cleanup in the parks. That review did not look at cigarette butt disposal. Largely, as mentioned by council, it's not permitted in parks, but your comment around perhaps someone who's smoking, who wants to enter a park, and they're at this point we would have to look at that. It is a bit of a struggle because we're not intending to encourage anyone to come into a park while they're smoking, but it wasn't covered in our work. Our work was focused on the efficiency of cleanup in the parks with a relatively new system. We have hundreds of hours of, as you've mentioned, in Adopt a Trail, volunteer hours to clean up, as well as spend about $250,000 in our base budget to manage the waste cleanup in parks. But the system right now does not have specific cigarette butt disposal. We could look at it, but it's, what I would suggest I would look at is just through some discussions with our staff that do the cleanup. I think one of the comments from Councillor Towner is if it is true that there's a prevalence of this happening, I'd like to talk to my crews and my staff around this issue and find out how prevalent it is and whether there's an opportunity for us to, at some point at the entry to the park, to have something with a notice saying you can't smoke in the park, but out here. But that's something I need some time to look at.
Yep, no, I get it. And of course, they can't smoke on the sidewalk on the way into the park either, but that's a different department. Okay. And we'll probably refer this one as well to bylaw enforcement because there are specific rules in Coquitlam. You can't smoke on a sidewalk accessible to children, and yet we see that all the time. And for goodness sakes, if you're in your car, use the ashtray. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our next question has arrived via Twitter from @Darlington, and it's, when will the city rescind its position that methadone maintenance programs are unsavory businesses, and will the mayor and council publicly state their support and encourage a mobile needle exchange program for city?
Okay. Anybody? There is a mobile needle exchange program in the city. Well, it's not a needle exchange. It's a mobile needle distribution program. It's run by Fraser Health Authority. So that's already not ours. It's theirs. Anybody have thoughts on the first one? Councillor Reid does.
I have a thought. It won't be popular, but to me it is an unsavory business and probably always will be in my mind alone. That's my own personal opinion. But one of the things I think that the city could do to help is by not having so many of the methadone places like the stores so close to one another. Like up in the Heights, there's 3 or 4 methadone outlets in one area, and I think it may help if we could have some way of making sure that we only have 1 in a neighborhood or 2 in the neighborhood.
In fact, that's the bylaw, although it's called, it has a name that
I know.
characterizes the businesses, the business types. The bylaws actually intended it. It's simply doing what we do, for example, with liquor outlets or any other thing, is keep them a certain distance apart, so that there isn't a concentration of them in one spot.
We do have one area in our city where there's a concentration of them.
Yep, historically, yes. And so rescinding our position that they're unsavory businesses isn't, the question probably was meant is, our position only is that we don't want them all clustered in one spot. As with any other type of business, you don't need a whole bunch of them all in one area. And that was the problem, remains the problem in Austin Heights, and the public made it clear to us through various means that they also had, there are members of the public that had concerns with the clustering of, be it pawn shops or any number of businesses that by themselves aren't unsavory, but which clustered become more of an issue. Hope that answers your question, Darla. Oops. Okay, so let's open the floor again to anybody here. Are there any questions from the audience? You're not audience. There we go. Speaking of active.
In the house where I can't see you. It was not deliberate. My name's Neil Nicholson. I live at 1189 Eastwood Street.
Don't tell my colleagues they'll want to take your seat.
No, they all want to sit where you can see them put up their hand. I have a number of hats in the community over different times. Today I'm here as a director of the Coquitlam Heritage Society, but I'm speaking without consultation with the other members of my board. A number of you were at...
Yeah, I hate to do this. Your name and address.
I did that.
Did you say that?
But you were talking at the time.
My apologies.
But it is still Neil Nicholson.
Oh, there you go. Got it.
Eastwood Street, Coquitlam.
Thank you.
We had a recent symposium on heritage that was well attended, including some members of council. I think that showed significant community interest in and support for our heritage. One of the proudest things I was involved with when I was on council was the establishment of a city archive. That, I believe, has been well received, well used by the community. The recent annual report was presented in these chambers to a full house. I don't think there's any doubt that the people in Coquitlam are interested in preserving and knowing their heritage. So I'm here, I'm sure you will realize, to talk about the need for a heritage center. Not a musty museum, a heritage center, a place where people can experience our heritage and study it. Sometimes Councillor Hodge and I disagree about which of us came up with demolition by neglect with respect to Riverview, but we do agree that that seems to be what's happening. What we see at Riverview is that what we don't preserve, we lose. Our heritage, preserved, accessible, is critical to supporting our planning in the broadest sense. We've seen when we seek support from other levels of government, it typically takes up to 5 announcements before something actually happens and somebody writes a check, builds a building, builds a bridge, whatever. Here at the city level, it perhaps takes 5 or more requests before we get action and commitment. I'd like you to start counting these requests now and look forward to seeing dedicated heritage space in the very near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Hodge has an opinion on heritage.
Okay. Yes, surprise, surprise. First of all, I do want to acknowledge the Heritage Symposium and the Heritage Society who put that on. A number of us attended that, and it was I thought a really good event, a lot of information, and it was great to see such a large number of people from the community come out to attend that. As it was a couple of months ago when Emily Looney, our archivist, put on a presentation here, and it was a full house as well. So obviously, I think that there's certainly interest in heritage in this community. I also note that the Arts, Culture, and Heritage Master Plan is there's a study underway right now, and in our master plan, our Parks, Rec, and Culture master plan, it identifies heritage as one of the areas in our community that's not being met and is underserved. And so I'm hoping that through both of those documents, we will arrive at a place where we can begin the planning for a heritage center. I recognize that the word heritage center is indicative of what is the modern day museum. It is not just a place where dusty artifacts sit and a bunch of dusty old people go to look at them. It's a very modern place in the community and a chance for people to not only look at their history and their past, but to look towards the future. And there's some outstanding examples of some of those centers. And I'm hoping that possibly working with the Heritage Society, that maybe we could organize a tour for council to go around and look at a couple of those centers throughout the Lower Mainland and see what some other communities are doing. And certainly if the Heritage Society would like to work with our staff and put something like that together, I think that there would be some interest in going and looking at some of the examples of what other communities are doing.
Very good. Thank you. Any other speakers here? We'll flip. Oh, Ms. Marsden.
Sandra Marsden, 3420 Highland Drive in Northeast Coquitlam. I'm representing here as a director of the Glen Pine 50 Plus Society. And since we have so many folks at home listening in and watching, I couldn't help but take this opportunity to give a plug for the what we call the, quote, senior centers in Coquitlam, particularly Glen Pine, which is right across the street from the City Hall by the Big Red Fish. We do put on programs for seniors 50 and older. And we have anything from bus trips to recreational activities to crafts, and we'd just like to invite and to let everyone in Coquitlam know, particularly on Burke Mountain, where we're getting a lot of folks that maybe aren't aware, they're new to the community, new to our city, and aren't aware that we do have two facilities. One is Glen Pine, as I said, across the street from City Hall, and the other is Dogwood. Thank you.
Outstanding. So now we'll go on to back to social media.
You make Falcon Drive between Guildford and Port Moody a 30-kilometer zone and make U-turns impossible for the safety of students. This comes via Twitter from @Hashley.
Someone who's probably students go to elementary. Mr. Diozeki.
Thank you, Your Worship. Falcon Drive is a roadway classified as a collector, and it's built accordingly. The design speed is at least 50 kilometers per hour, and so it's unlikely that for technical reasons we would be reducing the speed limit to 30. The roadway has a yellow center line all the way in the section in Coquitlam. That means that U-turns as such are illegal to start with. In some sections, there are some dividers, probably pylons or similar, also to, in part, prevent vehicles to cross the center line. I'm not 100% sure if the person who sent this question in was thinking about making U-turns impossible or prohibited. If the question is prohibition, then the yellow center line is a prohibition. As to making it impossible, I would be really hesitant to do it, because that would have to involve some sort of a physical device that, given the location, the curvatures of this roadway, probably would pose more traffic safety hazard than provide any benefits.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. I just had a question about how this stretch of road, Falcon, between Guildford and where it connects to Port Moody, would be different from Gatonsbury, where Gatonsbury is a 30-kilometer zone, pretty much from Foster down into Port Moody. Is that not a collector road as well?
I have a fairly low resolution map at the front of me showing the road classifications, and unfortunately I'm unable to identify whether Gatonsbury is a collector or not, so I have to assume that it's not. I assume it's a local road, and for local roads it's less uncommon to introduce lower speed limits. But there are many factors when we determine the speed limits, and these could be very detailed. So that would include the horizontal alignment of the roadway, in other words, curvatures, the vertical alignment of the roadway, the up and downhill sections. It would also involve looking at the width of the road, the overall streetscape of the road, the type of traffic, whether there are sidewalks or not, whether there is parking or not, what is the typical use for that roadway, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, off the top of my head, I'm unable to compare the two, but I'll be happy to look into it and give you a more specific, detailed description for each of these roadways.
I think it would be great if somebody could look at this question and see if it is possible. That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, we'll clarify. I know that Gatonsbury has a line down the middle, the full length, from Foster, from Austin, all the way into Port Moody, and I believe it's a collector, and it's historically been, it's like thermal, a historical, potentially even political decision was made to make it 30 kilometers over a long, its full length from Foster, I believe, all the way down into Port Moody, including that stretch north of Como Lake that's almost a kilometer long and perfectly straight, and it's 30 kilometers there as well. And I think that was more a political decision than an engineering decision. And the last thing I will say is that while Falcon is a collector, the stretch in front of the elementary school, of course, is 30 kilometers already. Councillor Zarrillo.
Yeah, I know that school board is already working on this, but I just wonder if for September we could, as a city, just send a letter to SD 43 with perhaps some stats from bylaws for the last year, because I am seeing an increase in the amount of U-turns that happen in school zones, not just at this one. And like I said, I do know School District 43 is working on it, but it might be good to arm them with some statistics so when they do their communication at the beginning of next school year, they can remind parents how they should be not doing U-turns in the school zones at drop-off and pick-up time. Is that possible?
Mr. Giozeghi?
Yes, Your Worship, it's entirely possible.
Thank you.
I know when in my days in DPAC, we regularly made requests of the schools and school district to remind parents, because that is it's typically seen as the greatest hazard in the school zone is not speeding trucks, but the parents dropping off their own kids and then rushing off. I remember once in this particular 30 zone, I'll take 20 seconds for this story, I had been there because it was on council's agenda to try to figure out what to do for the safety of that stretch of Falcon. And when I was finished, it was just after 9, and I climbed in my car and drove down Falcon. I was parked north of the school, and I drove down Falcon, and suddenly the car that I could tell, the woman climbed in her car ahead of me, facing me, and then did a U-turn right in front of me while she was on her phone, having just dropped her kids off at the school. And I screeched to a halt, and she fingered me and drove off, as though it was my fault that I was that I was in her way while she was U-turning. Now I get that, you know, when you're in a hurry and all that stuff, but we've got to remind parents over and over again, in every school zone, in every school, that it really matters how they drive, and that they follow the instructions of the school in trying to drop off kids safely and pick up kids safely, because there's so much at stake here. It's not just get your own kids in your car and then drive off. So, Councillor Towner.
I'd just like to add to that. Traffic safety around schools is something very, very important. And right now, the city of Coquitlam is addressing the walkability of the middle schools. We're in year 2 of that, and some changes were made in the middle schools last year, and now we're looking at change. I've been involved with HUB and working with some of the middle schools directly through my involvement as a councillor, but also in my role on DPAC. And unfortunately, a lot of the offenders in the school zones are the parents themselves. But at the DPAC meeting last week, Stephanie Cowger of the RCMP gave a great presentation that they're really trying to increase awareness out there in the school zones and making the community speed watch. We're trying to rally right now 2 or 3 volunteers at each school for 2 to 4 hours a month to set up with the speed watch van and volunteers to have the big screen and monitor the parents or the drivers on the streets that are causing safety issues, that is potentially preventing parents allowing their middle schoolers to walk to school because they feel they're unsafe. So hopefully we're putting a big push out. We'll get some volunteers and get the speed watch van up and running in the different schools in our district just to increase awareness and hopefully slow people down. There's lots going on as far as initiatives regarding the speeding in the school zones.
Before the next question gets asked, why haven't you done the elementary schools? We did those the last 5 years with the elementary school focus, and now we're in middle schools.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clerk.
This is a question via Twitter. It comes from @Kishanaroy. How many units of new social housing and affordable rentals are being zoned for along the new Evergreen line?
Mr. Roy is the Executive Director of the BC Nonprofit Housing Society, and obviously passionate about not-for-profit housing. Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Worship. We're not, I think as Council is aware, with the affordable housing strategy just recently adopted late last year, one of the key focuses in the short, medium-term action plan was really getting at and encouraging and promoting rental housing and looking at some of the other housing needs. Just to first directly respond to the question, there's not a specific zoning for social housing or affordable rental. It's housing is housing is housing. However, there are some incentives coming out of the both the zoning bylaw and out of the affordable housing strategy that provide inducements, encouragement for rental housing. I don't have any numbers right at hand in front of me now, but I know in some of the monitoring work we're doing for the implementation of the housing affordability strategy, staff have been tracking the new rental units. There's been a number that have come through to council. There's a number that are in the pipeline now. There's a number under discussion. So this is a piece of information we hope to share with council in the coming months. But we're getting into the hundreds of units potentially, so it is an encouraging start.
Mr. Wilson?
With all the new rental units that are coming on board, is there any efforts being made to work with BC Housing and any other nonprofit housing authorities to make those below market units?
Mr. McIntyre.
Your Worship, simple answer, yes. In those with those projects. It's one of the first things we raise with the proponents is partnering with other agencies and groups. So far, there hasn't been a take-up on that per se. In some instances, BC Housing, for their involvement, is looking for an equity stake, and that may not match with the business plan of that particular developer. But we do present that opportunity and have talked that up.
Okay.
Is there anything that we can do to be more proactive in making some of those happen? If we just leave it up to developers, often they're not willing to incorporate below market housing in their projects. But is there anything that we can do to encourage them, influence them, provide incentives to make some of these happen? We're losing over 700 low-cost rental units, and to replace them with units that are half the size and twice the price doesn't really solve the issue for us in the city.
Through the chair, certainly council's interest and support in collaboration with staff, we can make some more things happen. A couple things. Again, there is that provision now in the zoning bylaw and based on the affordable housing strategy to add density to a site for affordable housing, and so far that's been mainly been proposed in the form of rental. That's at the discretion of council. That is ultimately that's council's decision to make. So when those projects are coming forward and you see that as part of the proposal, you can ask those questions. I think there's going to be another opportunity coming up fairly shortly. We're just working on something now. This is, again, part of the housing affordability strategy implementation. We've been focused just most recently on the Talitha-Coombe project that went forward. That's now successful and moving on. We got something else that's on our desk that will be coming forward, and there may be an opportunity there for council's direction around rental.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'll speak as I'm chair of the Regional Planning Committee, well, actually I'm a member of the Regional Housing Committee for Metro Vancouver. And Metro Vancouver obviously also is a key player with its thousands of units of below market rent, so many of them of heritage units, and some of them now in need of redevelopment. Metro is now going through a process, and we're having discussions with a number of groups to see how to redevelop and renew those long-term long-term supply of non-market housing that's owned by Metro Vancouver, and seeing whether it can also be benefit from partnerships by various other organizations that might have surplus land that can be made available for it, or can bring something else to the table in the redevelopment of existing lower density and aging sites of social housing owned by Metro. So some opportunities, and it's something we have to continue to push for, notwithstanding that obviously housing subsidies are the purview of the provincial government. They haven't been as available with anywhere near the numbers that this particular, well, that we have historically needed, but also that this particular strained housing market is going to require in the coming years, as folks will be priced out of the market here. So, absolutely. Okay. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. These were two other questions that came in from Wendy Sandbrook. I've heard lately that swimming pools are being closed down. This must not happen. What will our youth do? More pools, especially outdoor, are a must. These pools can open as early as March and stay open through October. I would especially would like to introduce water volleyball. Our seniors would love it. There's a perfect place right by Glen Pine. I think it's Spirit Square. It's a useless piece of space at the moment. Now there's more parking. It would be ideal. We need to change our water in the pools to bromide and bromine and cut down the amount of chlorine. There are so many people now with skin problems and asthma. Lots of people cannot go near the indoor pools. We do not want any more high-rises in Coquitlam, 3 floors maximum, and a ban on monster homes and foreign real estate ownership. There's a lot of concern of ghost neighborhoods and no children playing and no community participation.
Okay. Interesting input. Mr. Alweva, I assume you're going to go on the pools side and not on the high-rise side.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I will leave the final question to my colleague, Mr. McIntyre, on the high-rises. Just on the swimming pools, I think that the reference here on closing down swimming pools is in reference to the Rochester pool. That was closed a number of years ago, and there was a number of issues at that time. There was a structural failure of the pool, but there was also a historical lack of use. And there were people in the neighborhood using it, but generally in terms of an amenity, an outdoor aquatics amenity, it wasn't as used as it could have been, but there were a number of issues, and they were discussed with council at that time. We are not closing down swimming pools. What the city has done is we've initiated and have a final aquatic strategy that we've completed, and that strategy does cover indoor aquatics, outdoor aquatics, spray parks, really all of the entire aquatics spectrum. And we are looking at opportunities in the longer term to provide outdoor aquatics. The question, though, is how you do that. And I would say that putting a pool at Glen Pine is not likely something we could do. There are many structural and specific requirements for a pool, and so it would have to be a long-term plan. The aquatic strategy does talk about a level of service, the number of people that it takes to support outdoor aquatics. Outdoor aquatics is an expensive infrastructure to maintain given the level of use, but it is also very valuable. And so we have invested in Eagle Ridge. We're investing in Spaney. We will be expanding Spaney Pool, and we do have longer-term plans to do combined outdoor aquatic and indoor aquatic facilities in the longer term, possibly with the redevelopment of CCAC in the very long term. So the aquatics area is under study right now, and there's some final consultation that will happen on the final draft of the aquatics strategy that will be coming forward through online surveys as part of the master plan, and then following that we will bring the final study forward for council to adopt. But we did close down Rochester, but this is not around closing down pools. It's around keeping the right level of service for the right level of community and the right location and type of facilities that we will need in the longer term. We have invested in a number of our outdoor pools, and we'll continue to do that. In terms of the actual bromine, there are health regulations that dictate the type of chlorination, etc., the type of disinfection we have in our pools, and that's really regulated by the health authorities, and we follow that. And I will certainly talk to our staff in the operating side of the equation in our facilities to find out whether we get a lot of complaints from users. Our pools are very well used, but any feedback I have never heard this before in the couple of years that I've been here, but perhaps we get some concerns. I'd certainly like to go back and talk to my staff whether the current chlorination or bromine, whether that's an issue right now to users. I will take that comment back and talk to our facility managers to find out whether that's the case.
You, Councillor Zerillo.
I just had a question about the dates. What dates do the outdoor pools open and close, or what is planned for this year for outdoor pool opening and closing?
Generally, we like to open by May long weekend. That's our goal, and we close them. Generally, we close them on Labor Day. There isn't much use after Labor Day. Actually, last year because of the school strike, we kept them out longer, and they were reasonably well used. But after Labor Day, we just don't see any use, so we generally shut them down after that.
I'm just wondering about it because I know the kids were asking even last weekend, we should go to the pool, and because it's been so warm. So do we have temperature stats that we can look at that perhaps there might be some benefit going forward to stay a few more weeks in September? And I know there's a lot of school-aged lifeguards that becomes a problem, but I'm just wondering if there is any opportunity to extend in September, because it's been so warm in September these last couple of years.
Yeah, I think through the chair, I think there is. We'll look at it. Last year we were very successful because of the school strike. We're happy to look at an extension. Really for us, if we can continue to keep some staff, because some of our staff are actually students, student lifeguards. They go back to university, but there are a number of them that still stay on. And last year it was very successful. I will take that back and find out whether we can extend that.
And then just one last thing. I read last week or the week before, there's a municipality, and I can't remember which one, that's doing a saltwater pool now. And this just reminded me that if we are revisiting our aquatics, I don't remember any mention of saltwater pool innovation, I guess is what it is. Just make sure that we can maybe capture some of that if there is any information about it coming forward. Thank you.
And to be clear, bromine isn't, it's not a panacea. It's got all kinds of health effects associated with it. It doesn't wash off as well. You can end up with, lots of people end up with dermatitis related to bromine that they wouldn't experience related to chlorine. It doesn't work in outdoor pools as well, as it breaks down extremely quickly in ultraviolet light. So while it can be used, it does get used primarily in hot tubs because it's more stable than chlorine in hot water. Then chlorine obviously evaporates much faster in hot water than in cold water. But I think with every decision we have to make related to pools, we bring in experts that manage, guide us with our decisions. And our pools are much better than they were. I used to be a lifeguard here in Coquitlam, and the last pool that we just closed down in Rochester, I worked at that pool. It used gaseous chlorine, and we had at least once a year a leak of chlorine gas, which is something to be discouraged. And we were only outfitted with dust masks which doesn't actually work with chlorine gas, by the way. We have come a long way since then. We only had 3 or 4 chemicals to add to the pools back then, and now we've got many chemicals, and our pool water is monitored by computer and much less by well, it's not monitored by lifeguards anymore as it was way back then. But I appreciate we do try to innovate, and I know staff are constantly trying to innovate. But when a pool is designed for chlorine, you can't just switch over. And when a pool is designed for salt water, you can't just switch over. So those decisions are made for the life of the pool when we're making the investment decision initially. Okay, and on the real estate, Councillor Reid wanted us to mention that foreign ownership of real estate is entirely a senior level of government kind of decision. The province and the feds could together make the kinds of regulations related to foreign ownership. We can't, as local governments, make any determination whatsoever as to who buys a piece of real estate at all. It's not up to us, it's up to senior levels of government. Okay, Councillor Wilson.
In terms of the pools, I just wanted to mention that yesterday I was in Port Coquitlam, and their outdoor pool was open, and it was great to see it being used so well so early in the season. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Councillor Towner.
Also, speaking of pools, I just wanted to give a plug in for the $20 summer child and youth pass. Unlimited access to the outdoor pools, the indoor pools, and the drop-in activities. And it's a fantastic deal to keep everybody busy and hopefully cooled off in the summer. It's $20 for, is it June, middle of June to Labor Day? So, awesome initiative.
Mr. Ralueva.
Yes, and I'd like to give Council the comfort that we're actually looking to expand the program this year, so we'll be bringing a report to Council on what we're doing. Certainly very successful. We want to continue the success of last year and give as many people, children, kids, youth, and actually their families as well, access to the system.
Now, on the planning issues, Mr. McIntyre.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yes, the third bullet point covers a lot of ground there. I'll try to limit my comments. First, regarding high rises, I would note that this is not an entirely new building form in Coquitlam. We've had high-rises here for decades, certainly more coming online in recent years. But that has been based on the plans that have been long established. It is also a means for the community to meet our regional growth obligations. In the regional plan, it's a fairly efficient, quite efficient housing form. It also meets the needs of many types of households that don't want ground-oriented or single-family. It also brings the population into areas that creates the vitality that supports the businesses and other activities. Sure, it puts some pressures on us for civic facilities, but that's okay. That's all part of a growing community. So they're not everyone's cup of tea, but it is a necessary and successful housing form. The ban on monster homes, well, as council is aware, we were down that path recently with our large homes review, and it was quite a lengthy process with a lot of consultation, and there was some, in the end, some refinement of the zoning bylaw around that. That's something we can continue to monitor, and that can be adjusted over time. The foreign ownership piece, I think that's been spoke to by Councillor Reid, noting government responsibility more than ours. The concern around ghost neighborhoods, yeah, as a city planner, you ponder that. I'm not sure to the extent that's happening in Coquitlam compared to maybe other areas and neighborhoods in the Lower Mainland. So it'll be very interesting to see the results of this year's census when information is available at the neighborhood level, so we can really sort of tease out, if there's housing that's not permanently occupied. On the other points, no children and lack of community participation. It's interesting. You think with the high rises in the city center here, there would be smaller households, older households, and that. But I'm continually amazed by the number of children you see being led to Glen Elementary School. You see playing out in the plaza across the way here, as compared to my neighborhood, which is single family. There's, you're lucky to see a teenager in that neighborhood, and they seem to be down here. So I think it's just part of the evolution of the demographics of a community. On the community participation, obviously that's something we promote, but that's also falls back on the shoulders of residents to take advantage and take part of things. And on that, just put a plug in for the Coquitlam 125 celebrations, lots going on this year. So there is opportunities for people to be involved in their community.
Yep. I'm on the Metro Vancouver Regional Planning Committee, and we're having to deal across Metro Vancouver with this issue. How do you uses in Metro Vancouver in order to make sure that we have enough industrial land, to make sure we have enough agricultural land, but also to make sure that we plan appropriately for an additional 1 million people over the next 25 years. Now, keeping in mind that we can't stop them from moving here. It's a very wonderful place to live, and people are moving here from across Canada and from elsewhere in the world. Canada could close its borders, but probably won't, because demographically we need immigrants. But and that 15% that is actually residential, that's where we have to put them, because we can't put them in the protected land area, the watersheds. We have more area preserved for agriculture than for residential, twice the amount of preserved for green space and for protected areas. And we're trying to preserve the industrial land that we have, and that's a dwindling supply as well. So within that residential, almost none of it is greenfield, if you will. It's developed residential already, and so we have to try to figure out how to put more people, and the only way to do it, of course, is to build upward, rather than sprawling. A lot of communities like Calgary and Dallas and Houston end up without limits on their borders, and they end up continue to sprawl and get bigger and bigger. Our choices are between sprawling or containing, and in this region we're kind of forced to contain because we've got mountains north of us, the Pacific Ocean to the west, the United States to the south, and they have a bigger army than us, and the agricultural land to the east. And so we're kind of contained in there, and trying to make a livable region requires us to try to contain the sprawl. But we know full well that people are against two things. They're against sprawl and they're against density. And the two of them, we can't be against both of them. We have to try to figure out how to be livable as a region, and the best way that planners and sociologists believe is that once you build rapid transit, you put a lot of density in high-rise housing form and office form around those stations, so that we can reduce the reliance on cars by using density around transit stations. Councillor Reid.
I just had a comment on the last slide where she mentioned about having ghostly neighborhoods, and it is true. And in the real estate industry, we recognize that. But at this city hall, I have to tell you that I think we're about over 40% multiculturalism now. And the council, in its wisdom, I always love to say that once we have wisdom, we have a big multiculturalism committee, which is chaired by Councillor Asmussen, and I believe Councillor O'Neill's on it. One of the big things that you find in our community, and I've noticed this for many years, is that the customs from the different folks that are living here, the safety standards and the culture in their communities that they've come from, don't allow them to have their kids out playing on the street and in neighborhood backyards and running around loose on their own like our kids all grew up. So I think they feel that they still have to drive their kids to school in this country, and their children should be in their homes. And there's a lot of homes in our community that are gated so that the kids stay in. The Multiculturalism Committee, I think, has been really good with that, so that people realize that kids here can play on the street. They can have a basketball or kick around a hockey net or do the things that we think are so ordinary. But to a lot of these families, they're not. So I think the best advice for all of us is to, if you see a family coming in from another country, another culture, welcome them and try and explain that, you know, this is how the kids here are, and it would be good if theirs could join in. And as well, I think a lot of them go to the Multiculturalism Committee with Councillor Asmussen, and within their own circles, they realize that the children are welcome to be out on the streets and welcome to be playing, and hopefully they are as safe as our kids are. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Why don't we go back to the microphone? There's undoubtedly some people who have now worked up the courage to get to the microphone. Please line up.
We do have other online
in an orderly way. Okay, well, we'll go back to the social media. I tell you, we're promoting this e-town hall. We haven't been doing this for long, only a couple of years where we've been doing e-town halls, and every year we get more and more questions on the e side of it, and I think that's pretty cool. So, part of it is the failure of the weather. We tried for rain today, but so that more people would come here, but we ended up with beautiful weather outside. So, Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our next question comes via Twitter, and it's from Catherine at KD Fredette. Is anything going to be done about the potholes and overall bad condition of Laurentian?
No. Do you have any other questions? This one's your fault too, Mr. Diozegi.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. I'm desperately trying to find the most current version of our paving program for the next 5 years to see if Laurentian is on it. The reason I'm doing it because obviously we have a program to deal with potholes, but if a particular roadway is on the list of upcoming capital works, namely full rehabilitation, then we are a little more lenient about fixing potholes unless it's a direct traffic safety hazard. So, needless to say, everybody knows that potholes are unfortunately developing typically on older roadways where there's a separation between the various layers of the pavement structure, and these start to show during the winter and after the winter period when the weather conditions change and start to open up. So it seems that I was able to find the right map in my calendar, sorry, in my binder. And let me see if I can find Laurential itself.
Okay, while he's looking that up, I'll relieve him of the requirement to talk. To make that clear, we schedule roads for resurfacing, and once it's on the schedule for resurfacing, we stop patching. Mostly, we of course patch anything that's dangerous, but we have stop spending money on the road because we know that in a couple of years we're going to be redoing it. We also have to time the repaving according to the pipes under it, so that just before we resurface a road, the crews go in and essentially replace the pipes that need to be replaced. And in many cases, they actually replace all of the, say, water pipes underneath there because they're nearing the end of their life, and it's much better to have them brand new when you put in a 40-year pavement, so that you're not digging up the pavement, cutting into it. The cuts are the part of the pavement that make it the weakest and create potholes in the future, so you want to minimize cuts after you repave to the extent we can. Of course, we can't stop the utilities from going in there, the BC TELUS and Hydro from going in after the fact. We try and encourage them to do their best as well, but I think Mr. Diozegi's almost got his. Nope. Okay.
I'm searching at the very bottom of my pocket, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem that Laurentian is on any of our lists, which leaves me with no other choice but to bring this to our Public Works Division's attention, quickly inspect the roadway and fix the potholes.
Well, there's one of us that lives near Laurentian, so perhaps she has some. Councillor Zrillo.
Well, I can't speak to the potholes, but I wanted to take this opportunity to publicly recognize what a wonderful job the city has done and Public Works has done on the usability of Laurentian for pedestrians. So that's all. I want to talk about the change in engineering at Austin and Laurentian. It has a light now. It is so much more safer. I have heard so many neighbors so thankful for the light, but I wanted to share with staff in this public forum, although I have emailed, that it has really changed the way people are using the street north of Austin and even south. There's new sidewalk, almost the entire extent of Laurentian from Brunette to Austin. I'm seeing numerous more people walking. I'm seeing more strollers. Yesterday, the day before, I saw a family I've never seen before with a baby in their front pouch. It's way more lively and it's wonderful. And I want to thank you for that. And I did also email about this, but I'm going to share it in public forum. The little cul-de-sac that has been made north of Austin, there's now children playing hockey and baseball out there, and there's actually a hockey net kind of there the whole time. It's just incredible the way that this seemingly minor change has changed the way people are using the street, and way more people are out. So I just want to say thank you for that. And as I said, I have no comments on the potholes, but thank you to Public Works and to engineering for this wonderful change.
And I'll echo that. On my bike this morning, I ended up taking the little right turn onto the cul-de-sac and really saw an active street again. It has been a challenge for the engineering department and for council over a number of years to manage that offset intersection. And any offset intersection, it's hard to put a light in, and so by closing it off with public consultation into the neighborhood, I think not everyone in the neighborhood was happy with that, but we certainly ended up with a much safer condition north of Austin and a much safer condition within the intersection as well. Mr. Diozegi might now have some.
I have some slightly better news. My list shows that a 4-block section of Laurentian is scheduled for some rehabilitation this year, and that's between Austin and King Albert Avenue, a total length of 225 meters.
Okay, and I'll ask Katie Fredette if you're still watching You could send in the 100 block or the address that we're talking about. That might help engineering as well with determining whether that's the stretch you're talking about or if it's a different stretch. Thank you. Mr. Alueva, on the issue of potholes.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is not about potholes, I assure you. I just wanted to harken back on the discussion around the opening of our aquatic system. I just want to clarify, all our spray parks and are open on May long weekend. The outdoor pools, the 3 outdoor pools open up in early June, so starting with Spaney, and a week after that I think it's Eagle Ridge, and then Blue Mountain. So I just wanted to let the council know and everyone out there, it's early June is when the actual outdoor pools open, but all of the spray parks will be open May long weekend.
Given the experience this year with weather, anyway, I won't finish the question, but I assume you know where I'm going. Okay. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you. This question is from Matt Johnlick. Most of Coquitlam's rental stock will be redeveloped over the next decade. What is your plan to replace lost rental?
Okay. The previous question was similar, but it was related to not-for-profit rental or subsidized rental. What's your plan to replace lost rental? Over the next decade, unfortunately, that's what happens when you build rapid transit. All of the properties in the vicinity of the stations are pressured, and in fact, we need to put greater densities on those sites, and in many cases, these are 3-story walk-ups at relatively low density. Unfortunately, that's the position, that's the point, the spot where the province decided on a station was within walking distance of most of Coquitlam's lower cost rental, and that has been a challenge. We do have some programs to get replacement rental done, and now that I've given him, there you go, Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Worship. And exactly, we do have some plans. But first, I would just note that rental stock, housing stock overall is of various ages and conditions. And unless something has really significant value, over time those buildings tend to get replaced. And so I think that's just one of the realities of a metropolitan area. However, recognizing that much of that is rental stock, or the rental stock we have had has been older buildings, the housing affordability strategy looked at that. That was one of the early areas of concern and study, and so there was a number of components to that strategy to come up with actions to either encourage or pursue additional rental housing. So we talked about that a few moments ago in an earlier response. So there are incentives in place for that. Interestingly as well, and it's not just, again, in Coquitlam we're seeing this, but across the Lower Mainland, the market itself is at a point, I think, where rental housing is a desirable and a viable housing form. Combination of land values, housing prices, interest rates, lagging household incomes, but we now see developers coming to us, and they may not even have a existing rental housing on their property, but they are interested in including a rental housing component, so that's encouraging. And other instances where there is a rental housing, is rental housing existing on a site, I think by and large there's an acknowledgement by those developers they want to somehow address that. So I think the combination of those various actions, we will see a renewal of the city's rental housing stock going forward.
Okay. So now we'll go to the audience. Are there any questions from the audience? Oh, good.
I wasn't going to get you to get off that easy. My name is Roland.
I'm going to waive the 5-minute limit then. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Roland Verrier. I live at 738 Farrell Street at the Victoria Complex, and I'm a director of the BCA also. I lived in Coquitlam for 11 years, and I've lived in the Coquitlam area off and on since the mid 1940s. What I'm concerned, there's a lot with the construction that's going on with the Evergreen Line and all the high-rise and all the other construction going on, is that I would like to see from the city someone that we can contact for that area with the concerns, you know, with the potholes, with the water we have to walk through, the mud, while all this construction's going on, and also all the safety issues that's come up, you know, like, give an example is pedestrians crossing the street on Coma Lake near Farrell. The streets, I mean, the vehicles go by about, some of them over 80 kilometers per hour. And because of the parking, a lot of them are parked on the north side of the Coma Lake. But there's so many things going on because of construction. This should be where the residents of Coquitlam can deal with somebody from the city with all these concerns instead of going to each department. I'll give you another example, is Farrell Street. I've phoned, I don't know how many times about these potholes on Farrell Street because sidewalks only go part way on Farrell, and then some areas where the house is on 715 Farrell Street, there's no sidewalk, and so a lot of pedestrians, when they're walking down that area, they must go in the center of the road to bypass a vehicle, you know, or they have to walk through the mud. And the same thing what happens to Lloyd Auto Parts, same thing there. But when I phone, the city usually comes and fills it up within a week. But in a couple of days later, the potholes still exist. It reoccurs again, you know. So there's a lot of concern, you know, about the area. It would be great where there's construction going down in town center, Coquitlam Town Center, and with Coquitlam that we can deal with somebody that can resolve our concerns.
Mr. Diozegi.
Thank you, Your Worship. What I would recommend is that the easiest way to get hold of the city is through calling 604-927-3500, which is the engineering department's number. This is manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So during the day, the call would go to our engineering customer service, where depending on the nature of the complaint or issue, we could open up a service order and route the service order, service request within our organization to the appropriate entity to deal with it. It's truly not the easiest way for the members of the public to figure out who is responsible for what, whether it's an evergreen line related problem, or it's a development related problem, or it's just simply a pothole that has developed in a certain area and that then would be the responsibility of our public works. So again, the simplest way is to call 927-3500 day or night. We'll certainly record the complaint. If appropriate, we issue a service request and then we'll follow up.
Your Worship, if I could just add on to Joseph's comments, and he's quite correct, and I appreciate the gentleman's questions and concerns, and there are various departments responsible for various aspects here. But I think Joseph's suggestion of contacting their service center, which is 24/7, is a good one, because that's a good intake point, and if it then falls over more onto the development side, it'll be routed to us. But just if I could add, for Council, the social impacts of construction is not a new topic, and we've been on this for a while. And I think as Mayor and Council is aware, we have received complaints and commentary on this, and it's typically channeled through to our building permits division. One of our managers there, Doug Vance, has been particularly adept at dealing with that. I think as also we've discussed recently, we're looking at creating a temporary position to deal, really just focus in on that, because our building inspectors are busy with just doing inspection. They're on periodic points in the construction process. Bylaw enforcement does do patrolling, but it's a big city to cover, so they respond to complaints. So we are talking about having a person be focused on this, but coordinated with staff in Joseph's area and engineering and bylaw enforcement. And once that's up and running, I'll let council know, and then that would be a good point of contact for residents as well.
Okay. Councillor Rasmussen.
Well, thank you for Mr. McIntyre mentioning it. One of the things we've been dealing with, I've been dealing with for a number of years with construction, is improving our social impacts, reducing the social impacts in construction throughout all the areas of our city. We've made some good improvements in that. We have a good neighbor pamphlet through Mr. McIntyre that goes out with every building permit, and for large projects, we have set up some good neighbor policy, new neighborhood agreements, especially within the Coquitlam area and some of the projects. We've also had all those people now have to put signs on their projects telling who they can contact if there's problems with that project in the neighborhood, the manager to contact and to deal with any of those issues on those areas. It's a process that I've been pushing for a number of years all over the city too. Construction's going to happen. We know that's going to happen. But how we can reduce the impacts to people in the neighborhoods as much as we can is what we're working on. So it's for both planning and engineering, it's an ongoing progress to keep minimizing that as much as possible. But we've heard it for a number of years. And I've been championing that. I think when Mr. McIntyre mentioned social impacts, and Mr. Steblin, is something I've been pushing for a number of years. So we've done many different bylaws and initiatives to get at that. And if you got problems, contact the developer. If it's a developer issue around the site, if you don't get, then contact the city through the engineering, public works, or just calling in, and we will try then get in touch with them and make them live up to the agreements that they should be living up to. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other? Ms. Marsden.
Sandra Marsden, 3420 Highland Drive. Drake Stevens, staff person, recently retired, I believe. And he was what I call the bear-aware guy. He looked after the wildlife, the deer, the bears, and he was kind of a first-line phone call if there was a situation in the Northeast. Has he been replaced? And if so, who is the staff person now? And if not, who do citizens phone in instances such as I had last year where a baby deer was born right there in my front yard? That's my question.
Mr. Giozeghi.
Thank you, Your Worship. Indeed, Drake Stevens retired a couple of months ago, and there's no question that he has left a very, very significant gap, not only in the City Hall staff, but also in the community. I've met him a couple of times since his retirement, and trying to keep in touch with him because he has a vast amount of knowledge of the wildlife in and around our city, and also he's a really, really nice and knowledgeable person to just simply exchange some ideas. So as to the position itself, we have gone through a process that included Metro Vancouver in revising somewhat the appropriate job description to make it suitable for our current requirements, and subsequently to receiving the revised job description and the proper classification of that job, we posted the position both internally and I believe externally as well. and we are at the very end of the selection process, and I anticipate that within days we will announce who the successful candidate is. I also would like to mention that regardless, anytime now or in the future, if there is a concern, the members of public can call the phone number I already mentioned, which is 927-3500, and we will make sure that we'll deal with the wildlife-related issue as appropriate.
And I also want to offer the services of Councillor May Reid, who's really passionate about wildlife. If there's a wildlife issue, sorry, I didn't mean wildlife. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Take a second to turn the technology around. Where are the conflict of interest rules for members of City Council codified? My understanding is that the approval process for the transformation of the school property adjacent to the intersection of Como Lake Avenue and Poirier Street to residential use was accomplished through the enabling participation of 3 members of City Council whose wives were at the time employees of the school districts, i.e. the applicant, and as such would seemingly be obvious beneficiaries of a positive outcome. Explanation would be appreciated.
Okay, well, as one of them, my wife is a teacher in the school district, and there's 2 others who are also educators in the school district. I must say that this is that would imply then that I wouldn't be able to participate, and in fact, none of us, I think, would be able to participate because we've got children in school or whatever in any of the debates related to the land use of those. The conflict of interest rules are quite specific, and they're codified in the Local Government Act, and we met every one of them, and I assure Mr. McCaskill that every one of those requirements was met in all of these processes. We're not in a conflict of interest. I also assure you that even if the school district had gotten twice as much money for those parcels, my wife wouldn't get a raise, and so there is no benefit to me, and there's no benefit to the other members of council, regardless of the outcome there. We are often pushing the school district in lots of other ways that are negative to the school district's financial realities. That doesn't affect us financially either. We're not in a conflict of interest. But understand the provision of schools, and that's the purpose of the approval at Como Lake and Poirier, for example, was to be able to, the school district was trying to find enough revenue in order to be able to put in place a new school up on Burke Mountain. That's one of our highest priorities, the school at Smiling Creek, and the province has made it clear to the school district that they have to find some of the vacant and unused parcels of land that the school district owns in South Coquitlam and put some of that revenue, some of that capital through the sale of those properties to work in building the new school. That seems like a reasonable reality that if you've got unused schools in other parts of Coquitlam, that the province has required the school district to sell them or to lease them out or whatever in order to be able to have resources to put toward new schools that are desperately needed in Coquitlam. This conflict of interest rules also relate, for example, each one of us is a taxpayer. So when we vote on the taxes every year, we're all in much more conflict in that because it affects each one of us in our pocketbook. This particular decision didn't affect any of the members of council in their pocketbook. Any time that there is a decision where we have pecuniary interest and it's not as by way of being one of the residents of Coquitlam, we step away. And I think most members of council have stepped away from something because they found themselves either to potentially be in a conflict of interest or to be in the perception of a conflict of interest. So I hope that answers each one of the questions there, and I hope it satisfies Mr. McCaskill, but it may not.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our next Question from via electronic means is through Twitter, is from Matt Jeanlick again. Any plans for a crosswalk across Guildford for users of the Coquitlam Crunch?
There you go. It's something that's been asked for a long time, but has some engineering challenges associated with it. Mid-block between Falcon and Lansdowne, the Coquitlam Crunch crosses Guildford. Well, it doesn't really, because we don't officially let it, because we officially require people to walk a half a block over to Falcon and cross at the light, but almost nobody does. They cross mid-block. In that location, of course, Guildford turns, so I suspect engineering would say it doesn't meet the requirements for a crosswalk, even an overhead lit crosswalk, but the question gets put to us all the time. Mr. Diozeki.
Well said, Mayor Stewart. The engineering department, jointly with the Parks Department, actually have dealt with this request several times in the relatively recent past. And as a joint effort, we try to make improvements to that particular location to improve pedestrian safety. That included review of parking, physical separation of the roadway, and so on and so forth. The engineering department's position for the because of the visibility concerns is that we are not recommending a marked pedestrian crossing at that location. The principal reason is that it might give the false sense of security to those who wish to cross that road. It's primarily a visibility issue.
Thank you. It is, I've seen lots of people, and they generally, I think, do it relatively safely because the pedestrians do get a pretty good view of the cars going both directions, but it is a challenge having a well-used circuit like the Coquitlam Crunch that crosses an arterial at some point in a curve. So I understand the question and thank you for it. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Worship. We do have one more online, but we need just to prep the slide. So if you want to call for speakers from the audience, that would be great.
Okay. Are there any more questions in the audience? Any questions at all? Please step right forward.
One question I have is with the school and the parks grounds, you know. When we get rid of all our schools and our park grounds, where we're going to do after? Where we're going to get the money? You know, what I'm talking about, like we lost that area, that part of that school area at Poirier and Coma Lake, and we're selling that land. We sold that land to get money for the school, and then we're buying land up. We're buying more school grounds up in Burke Mountain area from that land that was given that the provincial government gave to the developer to sell back to us.
Okay, you want me to clear that one up? The provincial government didn't give it to the developer. The provincial government sold it to the developer, but reserved the school sites at our request. We actually asked them, would you please reserve the school sites so that they're not part of the deal? And that's, the government made that when they sold land in the last phase. The school sites were essentially reserved out. And as a result of a three-party arrangement that was organized by Mr. Steblin, the school board was able to acquire the appropriate amount of land without having to invest the dollars. So it's not for the land purchase that this money is being gathered. It's for the construction of the schools themselves. So the fundraising, the capital fundraising that the school district is doing through, for example, the sale of those 8 lots, it goes into the construction fund, not the land acquisition fund, because they already have the land assembled for the needed schools up on Burke Mountain.
Okay, so these schools that don't have enough students or so forth, it was mentioned that some of these schools might have to be closed down.
I don't know that that's an issue right now. The existing schools are probably going to stay. There are some properties, for example, Coronation Park is a school that closed down a number of years ago, partly because of some deficiencies in the building, and has since been torn down, and now the property sits empty, and the school board went through a process and has sold that, at least tentatively sold that parcel of land, and money from that sale will then go into the construction of new schools.
So anyway, some of this land that's going to be let go can be traded off for some areas that we need schools.
That's the purpose, yeah. So they're going to sell the land. Let's say they sell the land for $10 million. That $10 million almost builds a brand new school up in Burke Mountain. Anywhere at all. So that was the intent of selling the land in the first place was, you know, whenever the school board sells land, the first people to look at it is the city, is do we need more parkland in that area? Should we consider buying part or all of that land? The one at Poirier, obviously, we didn't need any parkland in that vicinity. We opted not to purchase it. It went to the private sector. Coronation Park, similarly, we didn't need that land as park, although some of it will become park in the course of the redevelopment of that site. And the revenue that the school board gets by selling the land is being put into its capital projects in order to build the schools that are needed up in other parts of Coquitlam. So it actually does get traded off, if you will, just through one extra step. Okay, we've got a slide ready.
This appears to be a follow-up questions, which helps illustrate the dynamic electronic nature of this meeting. Falcon at Eagle Ridge Elementary needs attention. Can city look at 30-kilometer limit to Port Moody border and no U-turn at Tercel?
Completely different from the last. So as this question sort of already got answered, but it might be that these people weren't online at that time, and I'll go to Mr. Diozegi and
Thank you, Your Worship. Like I mentioned earlier, Falcon Road, it has a yellow center line painted. The speed limit along the frontage of the Eagle Ridge Elementary is 30 km per hour. We are not aware of technical reasons why the speed limit beyond the school zone should be restricted to 30 km per hour. It's a collector road and it's designed for at least 50 kilometers per hour speed. So unless there are some other very specific factors which are not obvious to us, I believe the speed limit is going to stay at 50. As to U-turns, at non-signalized intersections, people can legally make U-turns if it's safe. Otherwise, the yellow marked center line would prohibit U-turns along that roadway as well as on others.
Okay.
Your Worship, we have no more online questions in our queue at this time.
Are there any other questions from audience members? I'll open that. Are there any other questions from council members? Are there any other questions from staff members? Well, I do want to thank everyone for coming and for tuning in online. This really is a process where we get to hear from the public. We get to hear from the public in lots of other means as well, but this is just one of the means in which the public can share their thoughts and hopes and desires for this community with us. I hope council members find it valuable. I hope you have found it valuable, and I won't adjourn until he gets back. And so, if you also have any input as to different formats or different ways that we can accept questions or any other suggestions for how to make these as functional as possible, we'd urge you to let us know. And on that note, no more questions from anybody. I'll thank you all for coming, and it's time to call this meeting to a close. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councillor Reid, second by Councillor Cirillo to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you all. Yes.